Well, I can tell you that if I could only teach one thing, okay, if I could only teach one thing and I couldn't teach sales or I couldn't teach the mechanics of real estate, I would teach people about something I call the income thermostat.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, it's Augustino. It takes a bit of work to convert a motivated seller lead. To do so, you have to position yourself as a supportive advocate who can help the seller solve a problem in a very ethical manner. Now, the cool thing is that there's many ways to do this. Now, today's guest understands this. He has flipped over 1,000 single-family homes, duplexes and triplexes, and other types of properties as well. Now, during his tenure as a real estate investor, he has held a small portfolio of single-family and multifamily homes and mobile home parks as well. Now, he is the creator of the #1 single-family acquisition training in the country, the No Limits Sales System. Now, in it, he focuses on mastering the sales skills, acquiring properties, and learning the mindset. Now, he has trained solopreneurs and large teams to maximize profits with this material. He is also an expert in teaching others the art of talking to motivated sellers. Now, with all that, I'd like to welcome Todd Toback to the show. Todd, thanks for coming on, bud.
Excited to be here. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, I think it's going to be awesome. Now, guys, if you're interested in reaching out to Todd, you can reach him via his contact page at nolimitsrealestateinvesting.com. Okay, Todd, go ahead and tell listeners a little bit more about your journey.
So, I think a lot of times when people do podcasts, they spend a lot of time on their journey, right? And so I'll tell you a little bit about my story, but what I want to really, bring about you, the listener, is, usually when there's a point where someone jumps from, their point where they made their jump as a real estate investor, there is a point of dissatisfaction or anger or, just like a turning point when they're like, I need a change. Right. And a lot of people, they go out there and they say, hey, I'd like to do this, or I like to do that, or I want to lose 20 pounds, or, I'd like to run a marathon or something. And usually there's a turning point. And so as you're listening to my story, I really want to make it about you, and that you're, I want you to think, okay, this is, my turn in my journey. This is the spot in my journey where I'm going to make that change or improve this part of my business, or I'm not going to take this anymore. So with that being said, I'll jump right in. Right after college, I drove out to San Diego. I was living in Michigan at the time, and I got a job with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, selling Viagra, actually. I was in the corporate world just like you. And I was really excited about this job, learned a ton, had a great mentor, and he was pouring into me, and I was making pretty good money, right? And this is, you may be listening to this and totally broke and, thinking, wow, that's a totally different position than than I'm in right now. But what happened was I was talking to one of my coworkers who actually I had gotten hired, and I was working at the company for 2 or 3 years, and he was brand new, and I just got him hired from another company, and they brought him in about $15,000 higher salary than I was. So I had done some really, really awesome things recently with my company. I had closed some big sales, and I was kind of like the star of my sales group. Now, Derek, who is my manager, really, he's the one who poured into me, right? So he had really taken me underneath his wing and, taught me all about sales when I knew nothing. I could not get 2 words out of my mouth when I first started working with Derek, but I was like super, super like fired up about this, right? So I met with Derek, and I was like, Derek, I need a $50,000 raise, like now. And I was like, we just hired this guy. He came in $10,000 higher than me, X, Y, Z. This is why. And I was all fired up, and I'm expecting him to say, you know what? You're right. This is like, I was expecting to blow the doors down. And I'll never forget it. Derek came around to me, and he's like, Todd, I love you, but that's just not the way the corporate world works, right? And he totally took me down 3 or 4 notches, and he was like, hey, there's a lot of immaturity in your request. There's a process to this. You've only been here for 3 or 4 years, yada yada yada. And he looked at me and he goes, why should I continue to invest in you? It was like a little shot, at me, like everything I've given you, it sounds like you've all of a sudden got one foot out the door, demanding X, Y, Z. So I got in my car, and I tell you, this was my moment of dissatisfaction, right? Because I was living in Santa Barbara, California at the time. And, I was making $120,000 a year, I had a company car, but like houses are that, even back then, this is like 2001, we're in the millions. And so I'm driving home. I was completely humiliated. And I'm just like, looking for that next thing. Right. And that was like the anger moment. I'm like at a level 10. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking that my relationship with my boss is never going to be repaired. I'm going to be stuck in this cycle, this hamster wheel. And I'm looking on the right-hand side of the road as I'm driving home in Oxnard, California, and I see a Barnes & Noble's bookstore. I pull over 3 lanes of traffic. I'm not sure if you've ever done that before. Don't recommend it to get off the exit, but I'll never forget. I was in my Chevy Impala company car, and I remember there was this guy in there who's drinking a Jack in the Box soda, and he just gives me the finger. But I just got over to the exit, into the parking lot, walked in the door, and to the left-hand side, there was the real estate section, a book called Multiple Streams of Income by Robert Allen. Okay. I picked up the book and read the whole thing in 2 days. There's a section on real estate that said, find a motivated seller, send out some letters. And I went to the county courthouse at the time because back in 2002, you couldn't pull up lists from like ListSource or data aggregation companies at the time. You actually had to go down there manually and do it. So I went down there and brought some bagels to the lady that worked there. And that was actually a little trick for my pharmaceutical sales days. And she helped me find people who lived out of state, who owned property locally where I lived, send out some letters. There was like 48 of them that I handwrote, found a motivated seller. I got one call. And I remember meeting with this lady and I was so nervous. My heart was beating out of my chest and I didn't know what to say. But I had a few of the skills that I learned from Derek in the corporate world, right? And so a few of those, but I got the deal done. I didn't know how much to pay or how much the home was worth, and I didn't even have a contract, but we pretty much wrote it up on a napkin, locked up the deal. Didn't even know you could wholesale real estate back then. Asked like 3 or 4 people for the money in my immediate family. My dad said no. My brother said no. My one of my friends said no. And then finally, I got my brother-in-law to do it. He came up with the money to buy the place. Long story short, we bought it, put it right back on the market. About 45 days later, we made $80K, split it in half. My share was 40 and his share was 40. And after that, I was ruined in the corporate world. we talked a little bit about, never being able to go back. And that was my moment where that low point caused me to grow. Right. And that spirit of discontent and anger and desire for something better. And so that was my first real estate deal from there. It's interesting because as I was growing in the business, it was just me, right? I was a solopreneur and I was meeting with sellers and I still had my job. And finally, a few years later, I quit and I was doing everything myself, right? I was making good money, a couple $100,000 a year, but I had a mentor tell me and say, hey, Todd, listen, you're going to burn out if it's just you, right? You need to find like a mini you. So this is like this next level. So I remember waking up one day and I look over my wife and I said, I don't want to go to work today, right? But I was the business owner at that point. Right. And this was like my next level of dissatisfaction. So I decided to go out and try to hire somebody. And so I went and I hired a friend of a friend who brought him to me and said, hey, listen, my friend wants to get involved in real estate. I know that you're doing deals. Why don't you bring him on to team up with you? So I had this small office that I had gotten. And I remember we set him up basically on a picnic table, like one of those picnic tables you'd have like a barbecue. We call the barbecue table. Had no idea what I was doing. And I just said, Brian, hit the phones. So Brian started hitting the phones, man. And if you thought I was bad, Brian was like way worse. I mean, he couldn't get 2 words out of his mouth. And about 6-8 weeks go by and I'm like, this isn't going to work. This guy doesn't have it. He doesn't have the confidence. He doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know how to say it. And I was like, I'm going to have to let him go. So I went back to my mentor. I said, what's going on? And at this point, this dissatisfaction kicking up again because I'm spending money on marketing and I'm not doing deals, right? So this motion and this dissatisfaction is creating something here. And so he goes, you got to get what's out of your head, put it into a system and teach Brian, right? I'm like, this is not, on him. It's on you. So painfully, I sat down there. We started writing everything down, steps and process and scripts and principles. And I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And we started role playing and teaching. And every single day we dip into a little bit of training. About 3 weeks later, Brian locks up his first deal, right? It's about $40,000. Week later, locks up another one. another one. We poured into each other for about 6 months. Long story short, just Brian and I, myself, just this one relationship has made multiple millions over the last 5 years. And so that was the birth of the no limits selling system. So, obviously I still invest, to this day. We talked a little bit about, we still have a wholesaling operation and a flipping operation and invest in mobile home parks, but that's my journey in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, no, excellent journey. Now, before we get into the actual, the leads and closing and all that stuff, the mindset first. I think that's worth exploring just for a second, because one thing that I found when I was working in corporate is that there was a mindset that was prescribed to me even before I entered the corporate world. Maybe it was from when I was growing up, or just you just get used to things, is that the only way you get rich is to go work for 40 hours a week for some company, make sure you have a lot of education. So I went to school forever. I have like 3 master's degrees, but I guess 2 master's degrees. No, 3 master's degrees. And I forget how many they are now. And all this other education, all this stuff. And clearly that's not the way to do it, right? But that is what I was under the impression of. And totally wrong. In your world, when it comes to building the right mindset, when you're talking to people and you're taking on new students, how are you? I'm assuming in your world, you're shifting their mindset, because they have one way of doing things today that's just not going to translate to being an entrepreneur. It just doesn't work that way, right?
Well, I can tell you that if I could only teach one thing, okay, if I could only teach one thing and I couldn't teach sales, or I couldn't teach the mechanics of real estate, I would teach people about something I call the income thermostat. Okay, there's only one reason that we are where we're at. If you're listening to this, there's only one reason why you're the weight that you are, or you're making the income level, or you have the amount of money in the bank. And that's because you are comfortable where you're at. And I know that's hard to hear, right? But if you're making 50 grand a year, right? You may say that you want to make $1 million a year or $2 million a year, but you're comfortable with that, right? If you say you want to make $1 million a year and you're making $80,000 at your corporate job, well, the truth is you kind of like your $80K a year and your benefits and your company car and your 401k, right? That there's a benefit, that it's enough for you to live. There is something not stirring inside of you to cause you to do that. And so there has to be a moment, something that's going to draw you. There has to be a tension from where you are to where you want to be. So pretend like you've got the rubber band and let's just say you've got a corporate job and you're making 80K a year, right? Or it doesn't matter where it is, but you're holding it there and that's the rubber band. And you then start to pull it and you say, I want to be at $1 million, and you pull this all the way up to $1 million, right? There's tension there, right? And that $1 million, what's going to happen to this bottom portion, this bottom part of the rubber band? It's going to start to pull toward, it's going to be stretched. Well, first of all, it's going to be stretched, right? That's the most important thing. You're going to feel that tension and it's going to start to pull you towards that. The problem is that most people's thermostat, right? The thermostat is set at wherever they are, right? And so they are comfortable. And so they say one thing, but they're not there. And so a lot of times you'll have people, even in business and life, where if they lost their job of $80,000 a year, right? And let's say they wanted to flip a house, but they lost their job. You know what? They're going to go find another job, right? And the reason why is because their income went from 80K a year to 0, right? And they went to go stir it out, make it happen, and put out their interview, go for interviews, right? Because they went from 0 to 80. They're trying to get back to that 80, and that tension is going to pull them. And so a lot of times you'll see people in business where they go up and down and up and down and up and down, because they get to a spot where they get above their income thermostat, right? And now what happens is the thermostat shuts off. Right? That's the reason why I call it a thermostat, because it shuts off once you hit to a certain point, or shuts on once you get too low, right? So when they hit a point where they're doing too well, they stop doing the things that cause them to get better, right? Then the habits, the routines, all of those things, right? So if you're in commercial real estate, right, and you're hungry to make it happen, those activities would be talking to brokers, making offers, networking with bird dogs, right? All this activity that you're doing. Well, 90 days, you're going to start to see the fruit. So if all of a sudden you have this big influx of income and you're feeling great, everything you did 90 days ago, you have to consciously create new tension if you've got all of a sudden a wire in your bank account for 250 or a $500,000 because you just hit that new normal, right? And you got to be very, very careful to do that. So my recommendation here is you got to pick a number that is way outside of your comfort zone, right? Way out of your comfort zone. And you've got to put it in front of you. Okay. And I learned this from a number of people. If you rank this like The Secret or Think and Go Rich, this stuff actually really, really works. But it's not any magic juju about the universe brings it to you. Okay. What it's about is about sticking this in front of you of who you want to be, who you are, reminding yourself of that, putting it out there and creating this tension from where you are to where you want to be. So if you're making 80K and you want to make $1 million a year, you say to yourself every night, I make $1 million a year in cash flow. I make $1 million a year. I've got 10 million in equity. I'm a phenomenal leader who has a team, and I delegate daily, right? And you say this to yourself every single morning and night. You put it in, written form, and you read it. Now, the purpose of this is so that you're reminded of this, and it creates now this tension, this anger, that turning point. So now your daily habits are reflected in that dissatisfaction, right? And that's the mindset piece. You have to create something that's going to motivate you day in and day out, because this real estate stuff, it's actually really easy. Right? I mean, it's not rocket science. If you're doing commercial, you talk to brokers every day. You network, or you send out mailers, or you talk to people, and you find someone who wants to sell, and you have these ongoing conversations until there's a meeting of the minds. You lock up the contract, you do the due diligence, you raise the money, you buy it and keep it, or buy it and refinance it, and buy it and flip it, right? And I know there's some things there, but if you want it bad enough, that tension is always going to pull you towards that, and you're going to find a way.
Well, it's all about, and what I'm hearing is the same thing that I do personally, is establishing what your goals are on a regular basis. I do it every day, reading it over, studying it, and then chasing after it. Like we have a goal here. I have a personal goal, 3,500 units this year. That's a big freaking goal. It's a huge goal, right? But it's funny, just like you said, when you're chasing something down, the universe has a way of bringing it all to you, right? It just, because now your eyes are open to that opportunity. And I would say that when I was working in corporate, I wasn't thinking that way at all. I was in survival mode. I was trying to keep my salary in place. And it's like, now there's deals that we do, my partners and we do one deal. I'll get an equity of what it would take me 3 years to earn as a salaried employee is at the C level. I just do it in one transaction. It's phenomenal. I had no idea. That it's impossible. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, going back to that mindset again, you've got to know where you're going, right? And that part of that is, okay, well then there's that, and then there's the habits and the routines and the actions that you've got to take every day. And so it's not the universe, right? I think it's you, but you have to remind it. That just remind yourself of who you are and where you're trying to go, and then you're going to see those opportunities, and then you've got to act on them at that point.
Yeah. So what do you have any quick tips for our listeners before we move on to the next topic here? But any quick tips to help them really figure out what their mindset should be set, or help them set their mindset, or maybe help them adjust the thermostat so it'll shift it into a more of a growth mindset?
Yeah. Well, I talk a lot about this on my podcast. So if they want more information, they can head over to the podcast. But what I would say is, number one is create those affirmations, right? So create them, write them down, say them in the present tense, but it's got to be something that you're really uncomfortable with. Okay. And a lot of people say that they do this, but this is a habit and a routine that you've got to force yourself to do, right? And when you say it, you should feel like a little bit of an imposter, right? Because you're not there, right? You're not doing those things, but tomorrow, right, you will be doing those things, right? So write the affirmations, right? Take it. And then what I would do is I would start to formulate a plan for you to get there. Okay, well, what would this look like for me to do this, right? What has to happen? And then you start to formulate that, and you look at that and you see that, right? And then you start to say this to yourself day in and day out. And then you have to believe that you're worthy of it, right? Is that, again, there's this lot of this thermostat going out there. And so you have to stretch it. You have to say it. You have to believe it. You have to start to move towards it. And then you have to start hanging around people who are there, right? Because what's going to happen is the people who are probably in your circle, if you're making 80K or less or 100K and you want to be at 2 million, I guarantee your friends aren't making that. There's a chance they're not. So you have to find people in your circle who are there and are going to start to pull you towards there. And you got to offer those people value, right? For sure, right? In some way, you don't want to be a leech, right? But go out there and start hanging out with them, ask them to mentor you and give to them in every way possible that you can.
Yeah. And I think, to reiterate, presenting value, that's probably one of the biggest things that many people get wrong or they're not aware of, is that you can't just show up and expect these people just pay attention to you. You have to start in a position of giving to them. Give them stuff for free. Give them your time. Send them books. Buy them drinks. Don't be afraid to spend money on food. Do whatever it takes to make them feel comfortable around you. And that's what it is. I mean, you'd be surprised. Well, I guess you're not surprised, but I mean, I'm not surprised when I see some people just they think, well, why should I pay them? Why should I buy them a book for? I'm worth listening to. Well, you're not. You have to really, you're really.
Yeah, the other part about this is, depending on who it is, right? Depending on who it is, sometimes being a good mentee is actually a gift to the mentor. Right. So, going out there and executing on what you tell them, right, actually is extremely fulfilling to the mentor. Right. There's so many people who are like, oh man, I'll learn this and I'll do this and I'll do that and yada, yada, and they'll suck up your time and they won't do anything. Right. So, that's the most annoying of all, right? Is going out when you give your time. So, and I don't care how you find a mentor, right? If you've got to pay somebody, right, pay them. I don't care if it's 5K, 10K, 25K, 50K, do it, pay them. And that mentor, or if they're going to be able to do it to you for free, and you might be able to find someone who's going to give you some time, on a free basis, but just make sure you go and execute it. That's probably one of the biggest gifts that you can give to your mentor.
100%. I totally agree with that. So now shifting gears, when it comes to applying your mindset to the work that you were doing when you were first starting up, and then eventually what you're doing today, how are you translating it? And of course, how are you finding deals today, and how are you getting them to closure?
Sure. Well, I always go back to real estate, and we don't overcomplicate this, right? Number one, you got to generate leads, and you got to generate a lot of leads, because when you generate a lot of leads, you're not going to be desperate. You're not going to be chasing sellers. You're not going to be begging for the business, right? And so you're going to start to filter those and find the opportunities. So you got to generate leads and make that happen. So for us, we do direct mail. We network with brokers. We work with local joint venture partners. We do outbound texting. We do ringless voicemail in compliance with with local laws there. And then I think I mentioned we network with brokers and online PPC advertising. So some of that stuff we do for single family, and we do a portion of that for the commercial stuff. But we generate leads, and so we have a team of people who will take those calls and screen the sellers using our sales system and find people who have a problem and start negotiating with them. And so once we have them on the table, they separate the people who want to sell from those who don't. And then they nurture the ones who do want to sell to a meeting of the minds. We get the contract, and we now control that piece of real estate. Now, on some of these, there's going to be on a single families. Most of those are a quick exit, right? Where we are just selling those in this market. And then obviously on the multifamily side, or the mobile home park side, we will then go aim to buy and hold that. We'll wholesale if it doesn't fit our criteria, although we don't really get too much into wholesaling on the mobile home park side, or buying it and then refinancing it and holding it.
Hey, Augustino here, and I would love to connect directly with you. Text the word books to 202-410-4202 to receive weekly book recommendations from me.
Okay, so basically then you have your whole team. All they're doing is applying those strategies, acquiring the asset, and then getting them to close and hanging on to them for the most part, right? So the elusive part then for many folks out there is the closing, right? The closing, that specific thing, getting them to close. How are you bridging that gap for some of those folks? I mean, you guys are pros. That's a great thing about it, is that you're doing this day in, day out. So you get to hone that skill every single day. The other side of the coin, the other end of that phone, is someone who's probably never spoken to a real estate person in their life before, aside from the broker that maybe they bought the house from. Or maybe in some cases, maybe they didn't buy the house. It was given to them and they never spoke to any type of a real estate investor before. How are you bridging that? How do you do that?
Sure. Well, the biggest thing is there's a lot of communication techniques in the no limit selling system, right? I think we can talk, I don't know how much time we have, but we can talk about a couple of them here. And, when you're on the phone with someone who's going to be selling their piece of real estate, one of the things that you have to realize is if they're selling to us, not in every scenario, but in a scenario where there's some kind of distress, is that this person is a natural procrastinator. Right? Any problem that you don't head on, that you don't face on, eventually gets worse, right? And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse until it's faced head on. So you got to realize on the other end of this phone, if you're dealing with any kind of distress, is someone who has this habit. So our goal here is to now end this procrastination. Okay. So first thing that we have to do is separate the people who are motivated from not motivated. And then we find the people who are motivated or should be motivated or have a situation. And we need to address this. So we use something that we call verbal commitments. Okay. So verbal commitments is we talk to a seller and we do not get off the phone. By the way, there's no pressure when we talk to anyone. Everyone's like, I don't want to be a sleazy salesperson and I don't want to force anyone to do anything and I don't want to put pressure on anybody. I can tell you if you're listening to this, that's the farthest thing from the truth, right? And ironically, it's the people who don't learn sales training who become desperate and get pushy, right? And are they don't make any money, right? Because what you're trying to do using verbal commitments is you're trying to get to the truth as fast as humanly possible. You want to be a truth teller and you want to be a truth seeker. And when you do that, you then, as you're telling the truth and you give really, really blunt honesty to your sellers, then you have the right to earn verbal commitments, right? So what I'll tell the seller is at the end of every phone call, we ask for the very next step. So we have it make it their idea. So Mr. Seller, I know we spoke about you selling your property. I know that I offered you $200,000. I know that you're asking, $270,000, right? You said you wanted to think about it, right? What is the very next thing that needs to happen for you to be able to make a decision? Because usually when people say, I want to think about it, this could drag on and on and on and on. So what has to happen between now and our next conversation for you to actually make that decision? And then you shut up. I say, well, I've got to talk to my husband. Totally. Okay. Well, what is your husband? So this is where most people stop and they say, okay, well, I'll call you next week, right? No. You've got to peel back this onion. You've got to get deep. You've got to hit them between the eyes in honesty and get really uncomfortable here. Okay, great. Well, let me ask you, Mr. Seller. By the way, the reason why people don't want to do this is they're usually scared of the answer, right? So you can't be scared of the answer. You got to go back to the seller and say, look, have you talked to your husband about price before, right? Well, actually, yeah, I'd like to sell for 200 right now. I want to be done with this, right? But he's the one who's stuck at 270, right? And he actually wants to meet with 2 other investors this week. Boom. Now I've got the answer, right? I see what's going on. We flushed it out. We go deep. So now we can say, okay, well, great. I understand that. So let me ask you, so this is not about you thinking about it. And by the way, if anytime I'm not a fit, Mr. Seller, you could tell me no, right? And there's zero pressure, but what I like to do is just get to the truth as fast as possible and find a way for us to do business where I can make a profit and you feel good. And if this is not a fit, it's totally okay, right? So we let out the pressure, right? It's like we're kind of like charging towards, an end goal. And if we feel that pressure build up too much, then we let it out like by pulling away. So it sounds like your husband's going to meet with 2 other investors before making a decision. Am I correct on that, Mrs. Seller? Well, yeah, that's what he wants to do. Okay, great. Well, I'm at 200. What are you going to do then? Well, we're going to take the 3 offers and then decide. Okay, fair enough. How about this? When you get your other 2 offers, will you get those 2 in hand and then call me when you have those? And that way you'll have all the information that you need to make a decision. And then we can decide if my offer is going to meet your needs or not? Right? And she'll say, yes. And then I'll say, okay. And one more quick question. By the way, is it just price? I mean, it sounds like, and by the way, that's the first thing. So I'm going to say, let's meet at Tuesday, 10 a.m. I'm going to say, I'm going to be there right on time. I'm going to put on my calculator. Now, what I'm going to do here right now is if you ask a seller, this is the second thing I'm going to talk about. And this is the stealth mismatch. Sellers are constantly going to lie to you. They're not going to tell you, they're not going to tell you everything. And guess what? In some way, shape, or form, everybody, there's not a full truth talk to a salesperson when you're dealing with them. If you go to a car dealership on a Saturday and you're looking for a car, and the car salesman that walks up to you when you walk on the lot, what do you say?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm just looking.
But that's a lie.
Right.
Right. And so almost everybody's going to give that answer. By the way, just so you know, I've never asked someone that question in this scenario, and I probably have done it over 100 times. I've never had someone give me a different answer than I'm just looking. Right. So everybody says it. So a seller, they are naturally, picture this, they know what we do. They know that we're below market. They know that we're going to buy and make a profit. They're under no illusions. And this is where your mindset has to get straight, is that I'm not scared of that, right? You have to own that. And so going back to that is, if I say, well, is price the only thing that's important to you? Well, they're going to say, yeah, price is the most important thing. I don't have any other issues, right? You don't want to go in that way. So you have to go what they call a stealth mismatch. Okay. So a stealth mismatch is what you say the opposite of what the seller is thinking that you're going to say. And it's a little bit of like a pattern interrupt, where all of a sudden they weren't expecting you to say it. It's like this ninja move, and I'll flush out a lot of things that aren't there. So one of the things that I'll say is, hey, look, it sounds like these other investors are extremely reputable, have a great reputation. You've done your online research, and you're really comfortable with them.
Oh, that's beautiful. And they'll be like, oh, well, I'm not real. Maybe, I don't know. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of them actually is my brother-in-law, and he has to go to the bank and get a loan. And that's the other thing with the other guy. He came up and he just looks shady. Okay. Well, now we've got someone to work with. Okay. Well, let's talk about a moment for that. All right. So, how does trust, rack up in this, scenario, right? And how are you going to decide if these other two, let's say they come in higher, how are we going to deal with that? So most people, they don't want to talk about, hey, if these other investors are higher, right? But you want to run into that, face your fears so that you can address it, right? You can't fight the enemy who you don't know who it is, right? So let's go find that enemy. So now we could do the dance, right? I'm not going to win every battle, right? But at least I got to know who I'm fighting, right? So get in there, find it out so that you can address it and flush it out, get a commitment. And then the seller, now in their mind, we've also defined this for them now. So now we've pushed this forward. They know they're going to have a deadline of Tuesday. They know they got to take the 3 offers. They know that they're going to call me back, give me all the intel, right? And then now that seller knows, excuse me, my cell phone's going off here. And now, because we talked about the credibility issues here, right, is now the seller is hyper aware of this, right? And now is going to battle on my behalf. And on Tuesday, we have all the information to make a decision.
Wow. Now your program contains all the scripting, all this, I guess all the scenarios, right? It sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, the no limit selling system, this is what I created for Brian, right? So this is you, right? If you're listening to this, Brian is you, right? Is you're going out there, and this works for multifamily, it works for mobile home parks, it works for everything, right? It's funny. My kids, when they were younger, they used to want to buy stuffed animals all the time. And, we teach them to earn their own money. And I was like, look, you're not going to the store and buying a $20 stuffed animal. You're just not, you're not doing that. So I said, you got to go to garage sales. People are giving these things away. Right. And so we used to go to garage sales with them, and I used to teach them these sales techniques to use when they're negotiating for the stuffed animals, right? Just for practice. And it was a ton of fun, and they still use it to this day. So it works for anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, this is the skillmanship required to do this is it's huge. I mean, you have to know how to do this, not only to close the deal, but also when you're negotiating the deal as well. I mean, I actually use some of these tactics when I'm talking to someone about selling their asset to me, right? Why should they sell the asset to me over someone else? How am I going to make my offer better? It's not always about price. Price has something to do with it sometimes, but I've heard plenty of scenarios where they've come in at a lower price, but they won the deal because they were a far more credible person to deal with and easier to deal with too. There's that as well. If someone has a bad reputation of being tough to deal with or just a real pain, it doesn't matter if they bid $2 million more. They just don't want to deal with them, right? That's part of it too.
Yeah, and then you also want the seller rooting for you, right? So at the very least, if you have to come up, or you can, maybe they'll do the same price, but maybe you could negotiate terms, in a different scenario, right? So, it's going to be important at that point to, again, build that rapport. We talk about the 3 levels of rapport in the system. I'll touch on them here, but there's the first level rapport, which is what everybody does. Hey, how you doing? No, nice picture of you at Disneyland, right? And that's okay, but no, you got to go deeper, right? You got to have the seller then teach you something, right? Where you take something that they're really interested in, their passions, and have them teach you, and then you listen and let them talk, right? I know it's kind of ironic because we're on a podcast, we're doing all of the talking, but if you're listening to this, the key is really listening, right? People say, "Oh, I wish I could sit in the sales office with your sales team. I want to hear them crush." And they think they're going to see like the Wolf of Wall Street, And I'm like, actually, it's really boring because they're all really quiet, right? And the only thing that you can hear is the sound coming out of their earbuds, right? And that's how you know you're winning, right? Level 3, and this is if you're meeting face to face, is that you want to have you give you something, right? So for me, I love tomatoes, and I remember being at a seller appointment with one of our sales reps when he first got started, and this lady was like a complete tomato guru, and I was like, "Oh, I love tomatoes," and she took me back there, and we were talking, and we went talk about the real estate, and she was, teaching me how to get them really, really big, and how to fertilize, and not to fertilize too little, but not to fertilize too much, and that was the level 2. And then at the end, she gave me a big bucket full of tomatoes, and I took those things home. Along with a deal that was north of $50,000, right? So we were really, really pumped, and she loved us, and we loved her, and it was a great deal for everybody around.
Right, and more importantly, she also felt she had a relationship with you, and now she's going to leave that sale when it's completed with feeling good about it. Feeling good. That's everything right there. When everybody feels like they got a good deal, that's the best part. So for someone listening right now, if you had a piece of bulletproof advice for them, what would you tell them?
Man, okay, here's a bulletproof advice. Is you've got to work your short game and your long game. Okay, so your short game is that if you've got to bring in revenue. You've got to find a way to do that. That's the hustler in you. So you've got to stay hungry, make sure you're bringing in money, and keep focused on that every single day. But the other part of that coin is that you got to be building your long-term wealth and your cash flow and your equity. So you also want to be working your long game. So for me, I talk about, we still do single family real estate. This is our short game, right? We bring money in every single month, and without fail, we're focused on that. What are we making this month? How many calls are we making? How many leads are we making? How many offers? What's the last 4 weeks of revenue? But then the long game, right? Go out there and buy some income producing assets. Right? Make sure you're doing that, and make sure that's a part of your portfolio, because that's where the game-changing wealth happens. I can tell you that and I don't know how much you've talked about on this show, but the depreciation from your long-term assets will quickly wipe out any depending on how much money you make, it can take a huge chunk out of your active income. And defer a lot of taxes, and not only defer them for years, which you'll be earning a return on that, but also move that income from an active income to a long-term tax status. And I could tell you, these are levers that I wish I would have learned, 20, 25 years ago, right? You want to make as much money as you can every single month, and you want to be buying income producing assets that you can hold. And when those two merge, watch out, right? It's game over, right? And I'm talking about buying good deals, by the way. Don't buy deals just to buy deals, right? Buy good stuff, go out there, generate leads, and close. And when you focus on the short and the long, right, you're going to win big time.
Love it. Love it. All right, guys. Well, if you like what Todd has to say, reach him via his contact page at nolimitsrealestateinvesting.com. Check out his material. He's got good stuff. All right. Thanks very much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.